Suspicious millionaire spies on his cook, but is shocked when he sees what she's hiding. Before we dive into this thrilling story, I want to give you a special invitation. Comment below where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far our stories are reaching. And if you're into love stories filled with twists and uplifting endings, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss a single episode, and you'll be helping this space grow and bring even more heart-touching stories. Adrian Cole's mansion, nestled in a luxurious Los Angeles neighborhood, stood tall like a modern-day castle. Towering, black iron gates, security cameras at every corner, and perfectly lit gardens gave the impression that nothing could escape the sharp gaze of that home. Behind the white marble walls and glass windows, life was synonymous with absolute comfort, but not everyone who lived there enjoyed the same abundance. In the back wing, there was a room reserved for the staff, small, lacking large windows, lit by a single yellow bulb and furnished with a neatly made single bed. That space officially belonged to Isabel Hart, the mansion's cook. The 29-year-old had fair skin, long, straight brown hair she always tied in a low bun for work. Her deep green eyes carried a constant melancholy, as if every movement concealed a story she would never dare to tell. During the day, Isabel kept herself busy preparing refined dishes for Adrian and his few occasional guests. Her posture was impeccable, yet silent. She rarely smiled, rarely allowed herself distractions. At night, when everyone was asleep, it was as if another version of her awoke. As soon as the clocks around the house neared midnight, she would lie down for a few minutes on the staff bed, just enough to make anyone checking think she was there. But soon her eyes would fix on the door, and her heart would race under the weight of a secret. That night, the routine repeated itself. Isabel waited until absolute silence took over the mansion. The lights upstairs were already off, and the distant sound of wind crossed through the gardens. She got up with calculated movements, careful not to make the wooden floor creak. With every step toward the door, the fear of being caught tightened in her chest. Before leaving, she adjusted her bun, made sure no one was watching, and opened the door slowly, as if even the air could betray her. Outside, the hallway was dark, lit only by an emergency light casting long shadows on the walls. Isabel walked on tiptoes, shoes in hand, so no sound would give her away. As she passed through the main hall, her eyes inevitably drifted to the crystal chandeliers softly glowing with moonlight filtering through the tall windows. It was like walking through a palace where she would never truly belong. Reaching the garden, Isabel took a deep breath. The early morning air was cold, and tiny drops of dew had begun to gather on the perfectly trimmed grass. She walked toward the back of the property, skillfully avoiding the security cameras she'd learned to dodge with near military precision. Her destination wasn't the room she was supposed to be in, but the mansion's forgotten shed. The shed, in stark contrast to the house's pristine glow, was a cruel reminder of neglect. Moss covered its outer walls, and the wooden doors were cracked with age. There were no lights on the path, only the silver glow of the moon guiding her through the narrow trail. Isabel kept looking over her shoulder, fearing someone might be following, even though she knew everyone, including Adrian, was likely fast asleep. She approached the shed with quick steps. Her hands trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from anxiety. She gently pushed the creaking door open, the low squeak breaking the stillness of the night. As she entered, her eyes adjusted to the dimness. The air smelled of dust and old wood. In the corner, a small figure stirred, immediately catching her attention. There, lying on makeshift cardboard bedding, wrapped in a thin, worn blanket, was Liam, her 5-year-old son. His light brown hair was messy, and his pale skin reflected the vulnerability of a childhood stolen by desperation. He slept deeply but shifted restlessly, as if even in his dreams he could feel the harshness of the life they were living. Isabel knelt beside him, eyes misty, and whispered softly, "Mommy's here, sweetheart." With a desperate tenderness, she tucked the blanket around the boy's fragile body and gently caressed his face. For a moment, the weight of the entire lie she was living inside that mansion suffocated her. Officially, she had a comfortable room, but in truth, she never allowed herself to rest there. Every night, her only peace came from running back to that forgotten shed where her heart truly lived. "Tomorrow I'll get more food, I promise," she whispered, knowing he couldn't hear her, but needing to say it for him and for herself. As she watched her sleeping son, Isabel felt the burden of the choice she had made, hiding Liam in that shed to protect him, all while risking everything if Adrian or anyone else found out. Each night was a battle between hope and fear, between the need to survive and the anguish of living a lie. The staff room assigned to her was just a facade, a curtain of appearances. Isabel's true home in that mansion was that dark, forgotten space where the only treasure she had was hidden, her unconditional love for her son, and without her knowing it, her nightly steps were beginning to stir Adrian Cole's curiosity, who would soon realize that there was something far more mysterious about his cook than anyone could have guessed. The next morning, the Los Angeles sun poured through the mansion's wide windows, casting golden light over the white marble floors of Adrian Cole's grand living room. He sat in a dark leather armchair, a strong coffee in hand, but his mind was elsewhere. His gray-blue eyes wandered across the house's details until they landed on Isabel, who was preparing breakfast with the same quiet elegance as always. She moved through the kitchen lightly, almost soundlessly, as if she didn't want to be noticed. Adrian narrowed his eyes, intrigued. For someone who spent so many hours inside the mansion, Isabel seemed far too invisible. She didn't speak. With the other staff, never asked anything about his personal life, and certainly never shared anything about her own. It was as if she hid a piece of herself in every gesture. "She's not like the others," he thought, tapping his fingers against the rim of the cup. "She doesn't smile, doesn't complain, doesn't ask for anything. And when the house falls asleep, she disappears." At that moment, the butler, an elderly man who had served the Cole family for decades, entered the room quietly and noticed the rigid expression on his employer's face. "Mr. Cole, is everything all right with breakfast?" the butler asked. Curious. Adrian replied without taking his eyes off Isabel. "It is. But tell me, have you ever noticed anything strange about her?" The butler, caught off guard, hesitated. "Miss Hart?" "No, sir. She works quietly, fulfills her duties. She's never given any reason for suspicion." Adrian leaned back in the armchair, his voice low and firm. "That's exactly why I'm suspicious. People who are too quiet are often hiding something." In the kitchen, Isabel continued arranging the plates, unaware of the gaze following her from afar. Her calm expression masked a constant anxiety, and her delicate hands trembled slightly as she sliced the fruit. Adrian caught the detail and frowned. Later that day, as he walked down the hallway, he came across Isabel exiting the staff room. She was holding a handkerchief, and when she saw Adrian, she lowered her head silently. "You're always in a hurry, aren't you?" Adrian said, stopping in front of her. Isabel lifted her green eyes, surprised, and answered softly, "I just tried to do my job, Mr. Cole." "And nothing beyond that?" he asked, staring at her as if trying to pierce through her defenses. She looked away, uncomfortable. "It's not in my nature to meddle where I don't belong." Adrian stayed silent for a few seconds, but the weight of suspicion was growing heavier in his chest. There was something about this young woman that didn't quite fit. The way she avoided his eyes, dodged simple questions, and disappeared quietly after hours, he was beginning to believe Isabel wasn't just private. She might be plotting something against him. That night, Sitting alone in his spacious office, lined with wooden shelves filled with books and contracts, Adrian stared out the window facing the garden. The memory of Isabel walking silently through the corridors echoed in his mind like a shadow. She thinks she can fool me, but I'll find out what she's hiding. Outside, the moon lit the path toward the abandoned shed. And without Adrian knowing it, Isabel was already making her way through the darkness, toward the secret she could never allow to be revealed. Antique clock in the living room was nearing midnight when Adrian Cole decided that tonight wouldn't be like the others. His instinct, sharpened by years in the business world and surrounded by fake friends, was screaming that Isabel was hiding something. He couldn't ignore it any longer. He loosened his tie, unbuttoned the collar of his perfectly pressed white shirt, and headed to the bedroom, though his mind remained on high alert. He lay down on his precisely made bed, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath, but not to sleep. He was armed with patience. He would pretend to rest while every muscle in his body stayed awake, ready to catch the slightest sound. Silence overtook the mansion. Only the wind slipping through the massive windows made a faint whistling sound. Adrian kept his eyes half closed, his breathing steady when he heard light footsteps echoing down the hallway. The staff room door creaked ever so faintly, followed by a soft noise like fabric brushing against wood. He opened his eyes slowly. The darkness of the night hid shapes, but with one look, he saw Isabel's silhouette crossing the hallway. Her platinum blonde hair was loose, falling over her shoulders, and the dark coat she wore was wrapped around something held close to her chest. So that's it, Adrian whispered under his breath, barely audible. Just another one who gets close with hidden motives. He rose from the bed silently. His steps were firm, disciplined, the steps of someone who never let their guard down. He moved noiselessly across the wooden floor, following Isabel. From a safe distance, always keeping to the shadows. Downstairs, Isabel walked with care, as if she knew exactly where the floor might creak. Her green eyes scanned the area, making sure no one was watching. Adrian, hidden behind a pillar, observed her every move, his heart beating hard, not from fear, but from the thrill of finally uncovering the mystery she carried. Once in the kitchen, Isabel opened the fridge slowly. The light inside lit up her delicate face, revealing an urgent expression. She pulled out bread, fruit, and some milk, placing them all into a cloth bag. Adrian, stunned, narrowed his eyes. Food? He thought, puzzled. She's risking all this for food? But there was no time to reflect. He had to see it through. When Isabel closed the fridge and glanced around, Adrian quickly stepped back into the shadows. His pulse quickened even more. Isabel exited the kitchen, holding the bag close to Bo. Her body, and silently crossed the expanse of the marble-floored living room. Adrian, like a predator stalking its prey, followed her steps, driven by a mix of suspicion and curiosity. Outside, the Los Angeles night was cold and damp. The garden lights cast long shadows over the trees, making the atmosphere even more mysterious. Isabel moved toward the back of the property, where the forgotten shed stood in silence. Adrian paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and whispered to himself, "Now, Isabel, I'll find out what you've been hiding." The night crept on in silence, and Adrian Cole's mansion slept like a motionless giant. The hallways were drowned in shadows, lit only by dim security lights that cast long silhouettes on the white walls. The distant sound of wind slipped through the high window frames, but inside, a sacred stillness reigned. It was in that hushed stillness that Isabel Hart emerged, moving like a living shadow. She walked the corridor with light steps, her dark coat cloaking her slender figure. Her heart raced, but her face remained composed, trained by countless nights spent repeating the same dangerous routine. Her thin hands, hidden in her pockets, trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from the fear of being caught. In that moment, Isabel seemed to carry the weight of a secret that could never be exposed. At the kitchen door, she paused. The space, wide and modern, was the mansion's silent heart during the day, filled with aromas, clinking pots, and muffled conversations from the staff. But at that hour of night, the kitchen was cold and unwelcoming, like an abandoned place. Isabel took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a second, and pushed the door open slowly, as if each inch were a wall she had to force her way through. Adrian was hidden just a few meters away, perfectly still, observing every detail. His tall stature helped him stay concealed in the corridor's arched shadow. His gray-blue eyes shone with intensity, locked onto Isabel's discreet figure. Since first suspecting her, he had waited for this exact moment. The proof that the quiet cook wasn't as innocent as she appeared to be. Isabel crossed the kitchen without turning on a single light. Only the moonlight spilled through the tall windows, casting a silver glow on her loose platinum blonde hair. She made her way to the fridge and opened it cautiously. The quiet sound of the rubber seal breaking felt thunderous in her ears, and her heart nearly leapt from her chest. Her anxious green eyes shimmered as the fridge's white light flooded the room. There was nothing luxurious inside, but to Isabel, each item was a treasure. With delicate hands, she took a slice of bread, then a few red berries, a small carton of milk, and finally a piece of meat wrapped in plastic. She moved quickly but with care, as if she understood the value of every crumb. From his hiding place, Adrian frowned. His mind was racing to make sense of what he was seeing. He had expected jewelry, open safes, cash stashed in folded clothes, not food. And that confused him even more. Why would someone risk everything for so little? He muttered through clenched teeth, keeping his breathing under control. Isabel closed the fridge slowly, but before turning away, she rested her forehead against the cold metal door. The sigh that slipped from her lips was heavy, filled with pain and exhaustion. Her eyes closed, and for a moment it looked as though she might collapse. Then she whispered, barely audible, like a prayer, "Just a little longer, Liam. Mommy's here." Adrian's eyes widened slightly. The phrase echoed in his mind like a puzzle. Mommy? He thought, baffled. Who's Liam? Who's waiting for her out there? Isabel lifted her head and quickly wiped her moist eyes with her sleeve. She packed the food carefully into a worn-out cloth bag, its handles already fraying. The way she hugged the bag to her chest revealed it wasn't just food she was carrying. It was hope, in the form of bread and milk. Suddenly, a creak in the wooden floor made Isabel freeze. She held her breath, unmoving, her eyes scanning the dark room for any movement. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like it filled the entire kitchen. Adrian stepped back into the shadows, not daring to breathe too loud. He knew one wrong move would blow his cover before the truth was within reach. When she was sure she was alone, Isabel let out her breath slowly, trying to steady herself. She gripped the bag tighter and walked to the kitchen side door, the one that led out to the garden. Her hand rested on the knob, but before she turned it, she glanced back just once, as if sensing she was being watched. Her green eyes reflected the moonlight from the window, and in that moment, her expression was one of a woman torn between fear and necessity. Adrian watched every detail with growing fascination. His stare was hard, yet inside, a strange mix of irritation and curiosity was beginning to churn. Logic screamed that none of this made sense. A thief wouldn't risk so much for food. Still, something inside him held firm. There was a secret buried within that young woman, and he was closer than ever to uncovering it. Isabel opened the door carefully, letting the cold night air drift into the kitchen. The wind carried the soft rustle of trees and the bark of a dog from a neighboring house. She pulled her coat tighter and stepped into the darkness, carrying her worn bag as if it were her very life in her arms. Adrian waited a few seconds before following. His eyes stayed locked on her silhouette fading into the night. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, yet filled with resolve, he said, "Isabel, whatever it is you're hiding, I will find out." The side door of the kitchen creaked softly as it closed behind Isabel, and the chill of the night embraced her instantly. Adrian Cole's garden, always pristine under daylight, now resembled a maze of shadows. The tall trees swayed gently with the wind, and the rustling of the leaves created a restless sound, as if the night itself whispered secrets meant to stay hidden. Isabel pulled her coat tighter and moved quickly, clutching the cloth bag to her chest. Adrian appeared moments later, quiet as a hunter stalking prey. His tall, athletic frame allowed him to glide silently through the dark, using the marble columns and scattered sculptures as cover. Every step was measured. His sharp gray-blue eyes never left Isabel's fragile silhouette, lit only by the silver sheen of the moon. She moved with urgency, stepping around flower beds, avoiding every crack and loose stone as if she knew exactly where the path could betray her. Adrian noticed the familiarity in her steps and murmured under his breath, "You've walked this path many times, but tonight you won't escape my eyes." The cold air carried a faint scent of damp earth and the distant hum of cars, cruising the lower streets of Beverly Hills. But here, within the tall walls of the estate, there were only two worlds, the opulent mansion and the darkness that Isabel walked through alone. With every step she took, Adrian's questions multiplied. Why food? For whom? What could be so important that she'd risk everything for it? His heart pounded in his chest, not with anger, but a charged mix of tension and growing curiosity. Isabel finally reached the far end of the property, where the garden faded into a forgotten corner, the shed, an old structure of darkened wood, covered in dry ivy and marked with cracked walls. It was a stark contrast to the elegance of the mansion. Peeling paint, dusty windows, and a rusted door made it an ugly blemish on a perfect estate. She paused at the door, breathing deeply. Her green eyes glistened in the dim light, filled with both anxiety and tenderness. Then she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion, "I'm coming, my love." Adrian, hidden behind a tree nearby, heard every word. The sound pierced his chest like an unsolved riddle. Who's waiting for her inside? The tension on his face was visible even in the dark. Isabel knelt down and pushed the door, which groaned like a memory left too long in silence. Before entering, she glanced around cautiously, scanning the garden one last time for eyes that might be watching. Adrian held his breath, frozen in place, as if the mere sound of air might give him away. The door opened slowly, and a faint sliver of light escaped from within. Isabel slipped into the shed in a swift motion and vanished into the shadows inside. Adrian waited several seconds before approaching. His heartbeat thudded in his chest, louder now than the wind through the trees. He stopped at the entrance, his hand hovering near the weathered wood. He drew a long breath and whispered to himself, "This is it. I'm going to find out what secret you're protecting with your life." Then, from inside, a soft voice broke the weighty silence of the night. A child's voice, fragile, sleepy, and it shattered everything Adrian thought he knew. He froze. His breath caught in his throat. His entire body stiffened as the sound echoed in the still air, innocent, unguarded, and impossible to ignore. Adrian leaned carefully against the outer wall of the shed. The rusted, misaligned door left a narrow gap where a faint beam of light spilled out. He brought his eye closer, and in that instant, the world seemed to pause. What he saw inside was nothing like what he had imagined. On the cold concrete floor, cushioned only by worn cardboard, lay a child. A boy, no more than 5 years old. With skin pale as morning snow, tousled light brown hair and green eyes, the same striking shade as Isabel's. He was curled up tightly, wrapped in a blanket far too thin to keep the biting cold at bay. His trembling lips whispered something faint, as if afraid that his mother might never return. "You came back, Mommy?" The child's fragile voice echoed gently, barely louder than the wind. Adrian's heart lurched in his chest, a blow. With no fists, he had expected accomplices, secret deals, a hidden plot that would confirm his suspicions. But this? Never, not in the coldest corners of his mind, had he imagined a child. A hidden child living in secret within his own estate. Inside, Isabel knelt beside her son, her eyes glossy with tears. She placed the cloth bag on the floor and began pulling out what she had managed to bring: bread, fruit, milk, and a small cut of meat. A soft smile appeared on her lips, small, tender, though her heart felt like it was caving in. "I told you I'd bring something, Liam. Look what I got today," she said, trying to mask the emotion that tightened her throat. Liam lifted his tired eyes and offered her a frail smile. Isabel stroked his face with the tip of her fingers, gently brushing aside a lock of hair that had fallen across his forehead. The touch was full of unspoken love, fragile, unwavering, absolute. Outside, Adrian still couldn't move. His hands were trembling, eyes locked on a scene that shattered every layer of hardness he had built over the years. Isabel tore the bread into small pieces, offering them as if they were the richest of feasts. She opened the milk carton and helped Liam drink, cradling it in careful hands. And while he ate, she watched him like a mother guarding her entire world. Every bite a small act of survival, of defiance against a world that had taken everything from them. "You have to. Stay strong, my love. Things will get better soon." "I promise," she whispered, her voice cracking. Liam, his mouth still full, replied softly, "I trust you, Mommy," and that was too much. Isabel couldn't hold back the tears anymore. They ran down her cheeks. In silence, not of weakness, but of love and pain layered so deep that no words could reach them. Even crying, she smiled at him, hiding her sorrow as only a mother can. She wrapped him in both the thin blanket and her arms, holding him tight, as if her embrace could keep the world out. Adrian closed his eyes for a moment. Everything he thought, he knew, everything he assumed about her, unraveled. He was no longer the calculating businessman watching a potential threat. He was just a man, staring into a moment so raw and human that it left him undone. A woman risking everything to protect her son. Not for money, not for manipulation, but out of desperation, out of love. He took a step back. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. One hand went to his forehead, trying to make sense of the truth now crushing down on him. My God, what has she been through to end up here? Inside, Isabel gently rocked Liam in her arms, humming a lullaby too soft to be heard, a sweet whisper meant to ease a child's fears. And in that moment, Adrian understood something with a clarity he'd never felt before. Nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. Adrian stood frozen for a few long seconds by the crack in the shed door. The midnight cold seemed to have frozen more than just the air. It had pierced through the walls he'd spent a lifetime building. Walls of pride, of logic, of emotional distance. His eyes, so used to scanning profit margins and reading the faces of liars, were now locked on the image of a child sleeping on cardboard, sustained by the desperate strength of a mother's love. He instinctively brought a hand to his chest, startled by the quickened beat of his heart, not from anger, but from something else. Something he hadn't felt in so long he barely recognized it. Compassion, an emotion buried long ago beneath layers of ambition and self-preservation. He took a deep breath, blinked rapidly, and wiped his eyes discreetly with the back of his hand before gently pushing the door open. The rusted hinges groaned loudly, the sound crashing into the stillness like thunder. Inside, Isabel's head snapped up, her green eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. In a single protective motion, she pulled Liam closer, shielding him with her arms. "Mr. Cole," her voice faltered. I can explain." Adrian stepped forward slowly. The faint moonlight spilling through a cracked window lit his face, and what she saw made her breath catch. Gone was the hardened expression, the cool detachment she'd grown used to. In its place was something far more fragile: disbelief, empathy, and a struggle not to let emotion fully take hold. "You kept all this from me?" he asked, his voice low but weighted. His gray-blue eyes shimmered, wet to her astonishment. A rare sight in a man who never showed weakness. Isabel lowered her gaze. She couldn't meet his eyes. "I had no choice," she whispered. "I didn't want to deceive you. But I couldn't leave him on the streets. I couldn't lose my son." Adrian said nothing. He stared at Liam, now awake, wide-eyed, watching. The two adults, with silent curiosity and the quiet trust that only a child held in his mother's arms can offer. Then the boy gave a small cough, soft, almost apologetic, but it hit Adrian like a blow. He walked closer, slowly, deliberately, then stopped right in front of Isabel. His voice, when it came, was hoarse, almost ashamed. "God, how could? I have thought you were trying to steal from me." Isabel looked up, startled by the tone. Not harsh, not accusing, but broken. She saw tears trailing down his face, not dramatic or loud, but honest, raw. And in that moment, for the first time since stepping foot in that mansion, she didn't see Adrian Cole, the suspicious, guarded millionaire, but a man. A man standing face to face with his own humanity. Adrian hesitated, then slowly reached a hand toward Liam's face, not touching, just asking, silently. "He's cold," he murmured. Then he shrugged off his coat and gently laid it over the boy. The movement was simple, but to Isabel, it felt like a miracle. She broke down. Clutching Liam to her chest, her tears finally flowed freely. "I'd do anything for him," she murmured, voice trembling. "Anything." Adrian looked away briefly, breathing deeply as if to keep his own feelings in check. Then, when he met her gaze again, his voice held no judgment, no hesitation, only certainty. "You don't have to hide from me anymore." And with those words, the walls between them crumbled, not just the ones she had built in fear, but the ones he had forged in solitude. The silence that filled the shed pressed down on Isabel's shoulders like a weight she could no longer carry. She still held Liam close to her chest, her heartbeat rapid and uneven, fearing what Adrian might say, what he might do. Her breaths came short, shallow, her gaze lost somewhere between fear and the courage it took to finally voice what had lived as a secret for too long. "Mr. Cole." Her voice faltered, the words sticking in her throat. But before she could go on, Adrian raised a hand, a calm, steady gesture that startled her more than any outburst would have. His eyes didn't hold the usual coldness. There was something else now, compassion. And for the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to hide anymore. "Don't be afraid, Isabel," he said, voice low, almost a whisper, but unshakably firm. "Tell me the truth. I want to hear it from you." Tears welled in her eyes and spilled over before she could stop them. Isabel took a deep breath, trying to summon the strength that had kept her going this far. She clutched Liam's small hand and with the other wiped at the tears that now soaked her cheeks. "He's my son. My Liam," she confessed at last, the words tumbling out like the release of a burden she'd carried for far too long. Her voice trembled, but it held a quiet, unwavering honesty. I lost everything, Mr. Cole. My home, my job, my dignity. When I arrived here, I had nowhere else to go. And if I told anyone I had a child, I never would have been hired. I couldn't. Let him sleep in the street, in the cold, this forgotten shed. It was the only roof I could give him. Adrian said nothing at first. He was still absorbing her words one by one. His eyes drifted to the boy, so small, so breakable. Then, back to Isabel. And in her face, he saw exhaustion carved deep into her skin. But also something else. The courage of a mother who had faced humiliation, danger, and fear, all for one simple reason. Loved. Isabel looked down, ashamed of what she had just laid bare. I know I was wrong to hide this. But if you're going to fire me, please, at least let me take the food. I don't want anything from you, just a chance to keep him alive. A knot tightened in Adrian's throat. He slowly knelt in front of them, close enough to look Isabel directly. In the eyes, his presence was no longer imposing, no longer cold, but human, vulnerable. Wrong? He said, voice cracking. No, Isabel, you survived. You fought. You sacrificed everything for him. She blinked, stunned. Of all the reactions she had rehearsed in her mind, this had never been one of them. Liam, still drowsy, rested his head against her shoulder, and Adrian reached out, gently adjusting the coat to keep the boy warm. I didn't know. He continued, each word thick with emotion. That someone could love so deeply they'd erase themselves entirely. He let out a quiet breath, as if confessing to himself more than to her. And now, looking at you, I realize I never knew what truly matters. Isabel brought her hand to her mouth, trying to muffle the sob that rose from deep within her chest. She no longer felt like a woman on trial. She felt seen, not as a liar, not as a threat, but as a mother, as a person, and then, still kneeling, Adrian said something she would never forget in a voice stripped of power, wealth, and pride. You don't have to carry this burden alone anymore. I won't let you. The shed, once steeped in abandonment, now held something else, something fragile and profound. The damp-stained walls still bore their marks of neglect, and the wind continued to slip through the cracks, slicing through the air like knives. But none of that mattered anymore, because in the corner of that cold, forgotten place, something had shifted. Liam lay curled up, knees pulled tightly to his chest beneath the threadbare blanket. His breath was soft and uneven, barely noticeable. And when Adrian looked at him, truly looked, something inside him cracked. A piece of his identity, built upon pride, silence, and emotional distance, crumbled quietly, beyond repair. Without thinking, he took off his coat, thick wool, heavy, expensive. A symbol of the life he'd always lived. But tonight, it became something else. Not a status symbol, but a shield. A small gesture of protection. He knelt down and gently laid it over the boy's frail body, adjusting the fabric around him with a care that didn't come from habit, but from something deeper. Something rediscovered as the warmth of the coat touched the child's skin. Adrian shivered. Not from the cold, but from the sharp, undeniable sensation that he was brushing against his own long buried humanity. Isabel watched in stunned silence. Tears threatened to fall again, her throat tightening with a knot of emotions she couldn't name. She had never imagined that he, Adrian Cole, the man known for his coldness, for his guarded stare, would kneel beside her son, not with judgment, but with tenderness. A strange ache bloomed in her chest, torn between fear and gratitude. Between the impulse to run and the longing to believe, Adrian, still on his knees, gently brushed a hand through Liam's hair. His voice came out low but clear, solid with conviction. You don't have to hide anymore. There won't be another night like this, Isabel, I promise. The The words struck her like lightning. Her heart pounded. Double quotes, Mr. Cole. You don't understand, she said, voice trembling. If they find out he's here, I lose everything. My job, this roof, even what little dignity I've managed to hold on to. Adrian lifted his eyes to meet hers. There was no trace of anger in his expression, only pain. A reflection of her pain. You've already lost too much, he said softly, and you've carried more than anyone ever should. I'm not going to let you live in shadows anymore. Isabel took a hesitant step back. His words weighed heavier than the cold. But why? She asked, barely able to speak. Why would you do this for us? I have nothing to give you. Her voice broke on the last sentence, heavy with shame, the quiet shame of someone who's been taught that survival is a debt. Adrian moved closer, his knees pressing into the dusty floor until they were eye to eye. She could feel the warmth of his breath. His words were low, raw, honest. It's not about what you can give me, Isabel. It's about what I can no longer deny. He swallowed. Hard. I spent years believing wealth was my shield. That power was the only safety. But seeing him, seeing you, made me realize. Real poverty isn't material. It's the absence of compassion. And I don't want to live in that kind of poverty anymore. The dam finally broke. Tears streamed down Isabel's face. And though she bowed her head in instinctive shame, something inside her cracked open, not from pain, but from relief. From the sense, however faint, that she was no longer alone. I'm afraid, she whispered. Afraid to believe. Afraid to lose everything again. Afraid this is just a moment that will vanish. Adrian raised his hand and rested it gently on her shoulder, not as a master giving an order, but as a man offering steadiness. Then trust me, he said, because from tonight on, everything changes. You and your son will never again curl up in cold corners or survive on scraps. I want you both with me, not hidden, not afraid. Not as servants, but as human beings, as people who deserve to be seen and respected. The shed fell quiet once more, but it wasn't the silence of abandonment anymore. It was the silence that comes just before a life changes forever. Isabel let out a soft sob, not from fear this time, but from the fragile, burning spark of something she hadn't dared to feel in years. Hope. As Liam breathed deeply, warmed by the coat that had become a symbol of something far greater than fabric, Isabel felt the faint glow of possibility. Blooming in the dark, Adrian remained kneeling beside them, unmoving, but the look in his eyes said it all. This wasn't a moment of pity. It was a vow. A turning point. A quiet beginning to something neither of them could fully name yet, but that already burned, steady and warm, like a light piercing through the shadows. The weeks that followed unfolded like a silent metamorphosis, one that changed not only the cold hallways of the mansion, but also the hearts of those who lived within them. The dark, dusty shed that once concealed Isabel's secret was no longer part of her routine. Now, Liam slept in a bright room, sunlight streaming through a wide window each morning, painting the walls in golden hues. Adrian, who once paid little attention to the details of his own home, found himself involved in every choice to make the space welcoming for the boy. From the soft sheets to the small bookshelf filled with children's stories he had chosen himself, recalling tales his mother used to read to him long ago, the millionaire, once accustomed to calculated business decisions and emotional distance, was now disarmed by something as simple as a smile. One evening, as he watched Liam playing on the living room rug with toy cars, he felt something he hadn't in years, the innocence of home. Isabel, sitting nearby, observed him in silence, her eyes filled with gratitude and caution. She still couldn't fully understand how the same man who had once looked at her with suspicion now became a protector she hadn't expected. You knew he'd win you over, didn't you? Isabel murmured quietly, as though confessing something to herself while watching Liam line up the cars with focused seriousness. Adrian looked up, and for the first time, he smiled without restraint. Actually, no. I thought I'd lost the ability to be moved by anyone. But that kid, he reminds me that there's still purity in the world. Isabel lowered her gaze, overwhelmed, her trembling hands resting on her lap. I hid Liam because I was afraid of being judged, of losing what little I had left. But you turned that fear into hope. Adrian moved closer, his gaze firm but soft. Isabel, you're the strongest woman I've ever met. Not because you endured hardship, but because you chose to keep loving through it. That's something no amount of money can buy. She couldn't hold back the tears. Her chest tightened with the feeling that, for the first time, someone truly saw her, beyond masks, beyond judgment. He reached out and gently wiped away a tear from her face. A simple gesture, yet it carried the weight of an unspoken promise. In the days that followed, the three of them created a routine that seemed to defy everything fate had written. Adrian learned to make pancakes with Liam, laughing at his mistakes and the mess in the kitchen. Isabel, who once carried every secret alone, now shared responsibilities with ease. There were no grand declarations, just quiet moments, a glance that lingered a second longer, a cup of coffee served with care, a walk through the garden at dusk where conversations flowed. Like water. Love didn't bloom from suspicion, nor from the shock of a secret uncovered. It grew out of tenderness, routine, and the slow realization that they were better together. Liam, in all his innocence, became the invisible bridge between two very different worlds, that of a woman who had fought to survive, and that of a man who thought he had everything, but was in truth hollow inside. One night, as Adrian watched Isabel humming softly to Liam at bedtime, he stood quietly in the doorway. She stopped singing, embarrassed by his gaze. "Keep going," he said, gently. "Your voice, it brings peace, like you're calming me too." She smiled, shy but genuine, and continued. And Adrian, watching from the threshold, knew there was no longer any point in denying it. His heart was already hers. And so, the lesson became clear for both of them. Adrian, who once distrusted everyone, learned that trust is a necessary risk and that sometimes life tests us not to break us, but to teach us to see beyond appearances. Isabel, who carried the pain of loss and the fear of abandonment, discovered that true strength isn't just surviving, it's allowing herself to be loved. And so, in that unlikely home, a new story began. Not the tale of a millionaire and his cook, but of a man who found his humanity through a child, and of a woman who realized she was never truly alone. Life tested them. But love, pure, simple, and transformative, changed everything. And that brings us to the end of this emotional story, full of secrets, twists, and transformation. But now I want to hear from you. What did you think of Isabel, Liam, and Adrian's journey? Leave your rating from 0 to 10 in the comments. I'd love to know what you felt. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who loves intense stories like this one, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new chapter. And before you go, I've already picked out another heart-touching story for you. I'm sure it'll reach even deeper into your heart. Just click and let yourself feel.